Welcome to all my butterflies. You know what today is? It is Thursday. That means what? It's time for uncomfortable conversations. So welcome back. Those of you who are, returning guests or butterflies, and to all of my new butterflies. So I just want to say welcome and thank you. I'm going to start by saying last week was a lot. Right. And I'm super excited to have this conversation going into this week. It happened really fast. So here we go. I have a new guest this week. It is Mr. Brian Paonessa, and I'm going to introduce you to him in just a second. I want to go into some current events first. I don't normally start like this, but there were some things that happened this week that I feel like are really important for us to touch on. There was a young man who was murdered in Memphis. 5 police officers brutally beat him, and then he later died. Great news about that. They were actually fired. Some actions have been taken, and that is like the first in any of these cases. Normally it takes months on end for somebody to even get suspended without pay. So that was good. But it turns out that these officers were also African American. Funny, right? So now they get fired, right? But if this was somebody else, as we've previously seen, there's a whole long process. So that is an area of concern. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in my guest, Mr. Paonessa, so we can kind of just touch on this for a minute real quick. Mr. Brian Paonessa.
Hi, thanks for having me. Appreciate you.
I appreciate you being here with me. So what do you think about that?
First and foremost, it's your hat goes off to all first responders and what they do. That's number one. In the heat of the moment, I look at myself in my profession as a nurse, and it's sometimes, again, in that heat of the moment, you stop thinking and you just react. And when you're given all of that responsibility, your brain just shuts off. And I am not saying that it's okay in any...
Okay, because I was concerned about your brain shutting off when you're beating a young man to death, and it's 5 people.
Right. Sure.
Right.
It's, again, I can't speak for policemen, and I don't think we can't. But
absolutely no.
Again, in the heat of the moment, and having all the facts, as a police officer, and my standpoint on that is, your duty is protect citizens and protect your city and your state, right?
Right.
That authority might go to someone's head, especially in that circumstance.
Right.
Which could lead to them taking that role above and beyond of what it's supposed to be.
Right. So even if we just remove the fact that, those things do happen in the heat of the moment, what do you feel about, excuse me, how do you feel about the fact that this is the first case where officers have been immediately terminated without like a full investigation? Right. Because in previous cases, we've seen they've had to do a whole trial and then go through all the loops.
Sure. Look at the pandemic, the COVID pandemic too, and how we've learned from that, and what things we can take from that, and what things where our system is broken.
Very much so.
Right.
Right.
And going back now into this scenario, you're like, wow, immediate, suspension, elimination from your job and your career. That's extreme.
Yeah.
Do they want it to go to that level, how it was when it happened before?
Well, that's always been the case, though. This is the first time that officers have actually been fired. So it's always been, we're considering their family, what's going on, but what about the family that lost their loved ones?
Sure.
Right? Where's the consideration for them?
Mm-hmm. There is none when that happens.
Right.
There is none.
So do you think that because these officers are African American versus Caucasians, this is the reason that they were terminated? Or do you feel like the police department actually wants to see justice be done for this young man and his family?
I think they're taking what happened the last time this episode of this type of thing happened for a city and state, and they didn't want the repercussions of extending the court and extending the whole story as much as how long it went. Maybe they didn't want that this time. Because those officers, the last time this happened, they were what? Temporarily suspended?
For a brief moment.
For a brief moment before they were tried and
found not guilty.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, I just kind of wanted to just bring that
Sure.
up and just have a brief conversation on that because it was just a little alarming. Not a little. It was very alarming to me.
Yeah, you look at our systems here, and it's just almost like they're crooked, and they're just not. They're not. The standards that are held within our systems, it's not consistent.
Agreed. Across the board, it's not consistent.
It's not.
Because what happens to me and my family, the people that look like me, is very different from what would happen to the people that look like you on your side.
Right.
So it's very different, very unfair, and very unjust.
Yeah. And that starts from the top down.
Absolutely.
Look at our president. Look at our government. That's a whole nother can of worms we can open
up.
It's
another conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're not going to have that one today. Right. That's a different uncomfortable conversation.
But it's the same thing as how they're just so indifferent. And when they're thrown in different circumstances, they react in certain manners. And it's like there's no consistency. And that you wonder why some of our justice systems and our government is raises a lot of eyebrows and question marks. Well, it's double standard.
Right. So, the officers, they could have handled the situation very differently, but they didn't. So the big thing that I was hearing was he ran. I think that is the first instinct for anyone, especially if you come from that type of trauma that most African-American men come from. Right. Police come, they're going to beat me, they're going to shoot me. So yes, I'm going to run because they automatically think that's a safer option.
Was there a weapon involved? Do you know?
Not that I know of, no.
Yeah.
But the police could have done so many different things. Like, how do you think they could have diffused that situation?
You take a look, like let's give ourselves an example here. Let's say if we get pulled over by a cop, right?
And or you or me?
Any of us today. We get pulled over. We get pulled over by a cop, right?
Right.
We look down like, okay, were we speeding? What were we doing? Or sometimes it's like we don't know why we were pulled over, and that's causes kind of fear and the fight or flight response, which is there because then us behind the wheel, we start thinking like, okay, are we in danger? Do we have to do something extreme to save our lives? Or do we follow the instructions? 9 times out of 10, we follow the instructions because it's a higher authority above us.
Right.
They're policemen. So you have to be respectful to what they're asking you to do. And if it goes above and beyond of what they're asking, you're like, okay, time out. This is not right. And I think we need more facts to know why he did run.
Right.
Before we come out and create judgments or criticize.
Yeah, but I feel like regardless to whatever his reason was for running, 5, not 1, 5, right? 5 different police officers brutally beat a young man.
Right.
That's more than excessive force.
Right.
So I feel like there needs to certainly be some form of training. There's a huge miss in that piece where they just feel like they have to beat them, senseless. There has to be another way to diffuse those types of situations and handle things like that. With 5 police officers, once they got him down on the ground, realistically, that should have stopped it. Like he should have been handcuffed, put him in the car, all of that. But the beating was...
Yeah, that's crazy extreme. And again, when someone, and again, we've seen it on TV shows. We're not policemen, but when someone runs like that situation, what are the first thing the cop does? Calls for backup.
Right.
depending on how many cops were in the vicinity of that area, that maybe give you the answer why you have 5 cops.
Exactly.
You know, are they having bad days? Is there something going on that we don't know about? Then the mental health component comes in to say, look,
And that's another huge
is our
component.
our policemen or police women, are they under extreme circumstances and situations that they're not coming into work, right?
Right.
Because mentally they could be unfit for that position, and they take their actions out on this, and mm, I
Got
don't
it.
know. Yeah.
Well, you are a first responder
Sure.
as well.
Mhm.
You are a registered nurse. Actually, I'm gonna let you go ahead and you tell your story.
I've just been a registered nurse for 7.5 years, coming from Niagara Falls, New York originally.
Hmm.
I moved out here to get away from the snow. I wasn't married or had kids at the time, so if I don't leave now, I'll get
At
stuck.
the time, do you have
No,
a
still,
wife and
yeah,
children
no,
now?
no,
No.
no.
Okay. Didn't know if anything changed.
But didn't want to shovel any more snow, so I was like, it's time for me to make a move.
Yeah,
And coming out to the West Coast, it's just beautiful with the sunshine and blue skies.
it certainly is.
But to see our healthcare system here, we rank so poor when it comes to our healthcare. We rank like 48 out of 50 states. And I'm very fortunate and blessed to have the talents to take what I wanted to do above and beyond the hospital setting and make a difference in the city and the state in Nevada. And that's what I'm doing now.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
So I was getting ready to go into the fact that you are a first responder
Yeah.
as well, right? And
Mhm.
I'm sure you've had experience in the hospital or in a office setting where you've had patients become irate or do things.
Sure.
And what is protocol for you as a first responder?
Right. Stay calm. That's number one. Even during the pandemic, it's, there's so much worry and anxiety when patients come in the hospital because they're afraid to come in the hospital, number one.
Absolutely.
They're afraid to go to the doctors, because this was a very media-driven pandemic.
Hmm.
And I think most of us can agree on that. But to stay calm and to listen to that patient express their feelings and emotions of what's going on even before the procedure or why they're even in the hospital.
Okay.
So it's kind of matching their emotions. And once you do that, it's a great way to diffuse a situation in
Yes.
a scenario when the patient is just irate. And again, we live our lives with all the control. We make all the decisions for ourselves, right?
Absolutely.
When you step in a hospital, all that power and authority is gone. You don't have that. And you're always waiting for answers and have that uncertainty, and just you're always waiting for something and waiting for a resolve to the issue of why you're there. It takes time,
It does.
and as a nurse, you have to represent the patient and also the patient's family.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you just brought up the pandemic. So let's touch on that. You being a first responder, a nurse, working in the hospital, what did you think about the pandemic? Like, did you feel like, oh, this is a real thing? Or were you like, this is a whole hoax, it's a ploy? What are your thoughts?
It's definitely, the COVID pandemic was, in my opinion, a different variation of the flu that we didn't have enough information about. We didn't study it. We didn't know it. There was no information, and it went to the extremes. But remember, as a nurse, you don't segregate. There's no discrimination between viruses, illness, diseases, ethnicities. There's none of that. You're treating the patient with care and compassion and empathy. And that's what really drove the wedge in between the healthcare industry, because when public health steps in and tells your managers and your corporation how to run their hospitals,
Right.
and their staff how to do their jobs, guess what? That puts a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth
Absolutely.
that have been doing the career for 10, 15, 20 years. And that's what's pushed away a lot of the nurses from the industry.
Right. So just to go back to the pandemic and COVID,
Yeah.
you saw it firsthand. How did it make you feel when you heard people say, oh, it's not a real thing, it's a conspiracy?
Yeah.
How did you respond to that?
When you get patients that come in the hospital and you have to triage the patient, so you have to, based on their symptoms. So when someone comes in with a respiratory infection or sniffles or coughing, again, that's the first sign of COVID, right? When someone comes in with a abdominal pain and their gallbladder or their appendix burst, again, they have to sit there in a chair and and just say, tough up. I mean, there's really nothing we can do. We have to focus on triaging this patient that just came in for, which has COVID symptoms.
Everybody else kind of had to wait.
Yep.
And the pandemic people, COVID-19
first priority.
People were first priority.
Yep. And then with your staff, all the nurses were dropping like flies, which was the crazy thing, because you can't have someone taking care of patients that have symptoms, because then that could end up in a lawsuit.
Yeah. So when people came to you that didn't necessarily believe it was real, like, what was your response to them being hands-on, first seeing it and knowing that it was real from your perspective?
Yeah.
How did you challenge that?
I think the thing that you had to pay attention to was pre-existing conditions. And that's a lot of the things that were not mentioned. Just COVID took the front runner of all of the problems for everybody. And then what happened with nurses is the hospitals were mandating the vaccine. And some nurses were like, absolutely not.
Not taking it.
Mm-mm. Which caused friction between employees now and managers.
Right.
And it came down to... Go ahead.
So I would think that the nurses, like yourself, being there firsthand, seeing it and knowing that it's real, would be more willing to actually take the vaccine.
Right.
So how is that, like, working around people that knew it, saw it firsthand, knew it was a real thing, but they still were in denial about the vaccine?
Challenging. Very challenging, because you start to deal with people's emotions. And when emotions get involved in the workplace setting,
it changes things.
Oh, yeah, big time.
So were you one of those people that ran to get the vaccine?
I was not.
Ooh, why not?
Running, because I was, again, the reason why, am I vaccinated now? Yes. Was I running to get the vaccine? No, because I wanted more information. And I think all of us, when something like this happens, we need to find out more information and really understanding how viruses work, how vaccines work, how infections work. When they're first coming out, there's a 96% survival rate of COVID. 96%. So you're like, okay, well, wait a second. It's not like, remember, the flu, and you can look at all the records, the flu, the influenza or pandemic as well, that killed 10 times more people than the COVID pandemic.
Right. I agree.
That's the truth. Look at the facts. That is the truth. So, again, what's your pre-existing conditions coming into getting sick? Do you have cardiac issues? Are you diabetic? Do you smoke? Do you have lung issues already? Of course, that's going to amplify how you are. When you're diagnosed with COVID, it's going to amplify everything.
Right.
Because your immune system is weakened.
It's already weakened.
Yeah. Okay. And of course, that is scary. But again, here's the thing. When you have nurses that are young, healthy, think about it. Should I put something in my body that we don't fully understand yet? And again, that's what caused the friction. The friction.
Yeah.
To say, look, is this a fluke? Is this real? And again, look at the times during when really COVID was full throttle. Our president was changing. Republicans were rebelling against Democrats and so on and so forth. Our country was in chaos.
Yeah, we still are. But that's another story.
Yeah,
as
of
well.
course, yeah.
So first,
the government was the first were the people to enforce vaccinations, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah,
made it tough. Do you feel like first responders like yourself received the support that they needed to do the job that was required for the pandemic?
No.
Why not?
Absolutely not. Because these grants that corporations were getting, none of it was given to nurses.
What? I'm not surprised. Really.
Look at read the New York Times 2 years ago. And again, I'm not mentioning any names, but you see that corporations were like giving millions and billions of dollars from the government. You're like, okay, well, who's taking care of these patients?
Right. Well, what about, when people say there was a huge increase in nurses' pay?
Traveling nurses?
traveling nurses that worked in the hospitals. I mean, I personally know nurses that their salaries were
So
significantly
let me just
increased.
stop you there for a second.
Okay.
Again, I worked during the pandemic, and again, I just want to clarify that was saying, okay, the only reason why I got paid more was because I got floated to different areas of the hospital, and I was willing to work with COVID patients. I was willing to sacrifice my own health to take care of others at that time, because as a nurse, that's what you do.
Okay.
So again, I didn't receive any extra money besides overtime pay. So I don't know where that money went.
So you feel like there should have been
Of course.
like a grant that you should have received,
Sure.
kind of like the PPP
Right,
loans that
right.
the businesses were getting.
It's great that you stall the student loans. It's great.
Yeah.
But you're mandating these nursing schools to produce nursing students faster to fill the roles that were void at the hospital at these times to, have for patients to be taken care of. And guess who benefits? Corporations.
Yep. All right. Fair enough. So I'm going to go ahead and just jump back to the vaccines real quick, because you said you didn't get it initially and then you ended up getting.
Right.
What new information was presented for you that made you feel like, okay, this is enough information now, I'm willing to take this?
It's more of your public duty to get vaccinated so you don't spread it to other people. And it's almost like, you know what? At the end of the day, I have a niece, I have a nephew, I have mom and dad, they're older in age, brother-in-law, sister. Do I want to take something home and give it to them because I'm just trying to make more money overtime? Think about it.
Right.
I'm working 14, 15 hours in the ER with a room with 7 or 8 COVID patients, smaller than this room.
No.
Now, here's the funny thing. Did I ever get diagnosed with COVID? No. No. Was I vaccinated at that time? No. And I'm proud to say that. I don't have any remorse about that, because I was like, I needed more information.
Right.
So how is that possible? What am I lucky?
Maybe you just have a really good immune system, like myself. I mean, I don't know.
Well, I mean, I look at myself. I'm a healthy. Thanks be to God. I'm a healthy 30. I was at the time 36, 37-year-old male.
Right.
No pre-existing conditions.
Mm-hmm.
I was still working out. And again, when you work out, you break down your immune system. And if you're not having the proper rest or nutrition, guess what? You are more prone to getting sick.
Absolutely. Rest is so important for our bodies. We need to rest. What is the recommended amount of rest that a person needs to get on a daily basis?
That's a tricky question. I mean, again, you look at adolescents and kids and things like that, they need all the rest they can get. Us as adults, I mean, if you're getting quality, remember, how deep is your sleep? Are you getting into deep REM sleep?
If I'm talking about a person that's not getting any
I mean,
sleep.
at least, you should be getting more than 6 hours of sleep.
Okay. Yeah. I just want to put that out there for the butterflies, just in case they wanted to know.
I mean, if you have 24 hours in a day, right? And again, as entrepreneurs, as we all are, business people, no matter what you do, there's only so many hours in a day. And if you're sleeping 8 to 10, 12 hours, I mean, you're wasting the whole day.
Yeah. This is true.
If you're working 12 hours, well, guess what? And you sleep 8 of those hours, that's 20 hours already. You only have 4 hours to get stuff done. I'm concerned.
You and me both. So we're getting close to the end of our session, but there's another important question I just want to ask you really quick. Being in the hospital, working with nurses, I'm sure some of your coworkers actually contracted COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Did you lose anyone that you worked with? And what was that like?
Thank God, no. We did not.
No.
A lot of nurses were positive with COVID that we did work with very closely. And they're out for, 7 days, 10 days, because the hospitals wouldn't let them come back until they tested negative or they didn't have any symptoms.
Okay.
So, yeah, thank God, no.
And we don't know anyone that knew anyone close.
Oh, I mean,
do you know any nurses that actually took the virus home and maybe lost somebody at home?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
No.
Well, then that's good.
Yeah.
That's great to hear. I love to hear good news.
Right. And it's just, I mean, too, with, nurses coming down with the COVID, it's an unfortunate thing. because now guess what? As a nurse that I don't have COVID, I have to do double work now.
Right.
And when you have 2 or 3 nurses that are
Double work that you're not making extra money
right,
for.
you're having symptoms, and you're
Yeah.
like, okay, goodbye, see you later. Like, don't come around here. Like, go home. Take care of yourself. That was the struggle, because a
Yeah.
lot of nurses were getting sick,
Yeah.
and it's like, okay, well, is that fair to the other nurses that are?
I have a question.
Sure.
Do you feel like it was working in this field? I know there's not a lot of male nurses, but did you see more male nurses getting sick or more females, or would you say it was like about the same?
That's a tough question to answer, just because even the nursing industry right now is 90% women.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, with males in the nursing world are like unicorns sometimes. It's true. It's
Okay.
true. So, I mean, I would have to say, honestly, more females were getting diagnosed with COVID because they're the majority at the hospitals.
Okay.
Yeah.
Really quick before we get out of here, can you share with us, all of the butterflies, why you actually became a nurse?
I was a personal trainer for 10 years, and I wanted to take my education to the next level. And it was either become a therapist or a nurse. So I chose nursing. And I've learned so much from my career as far as patience and empathy and compassion. And you learn it from women actually in the career. Because think about it, mothers, right? Most nurses are mothers. And that's something that it's so special to see when they take care of their patients. And that's what you want. As a male, I can't give that, of course, but it's a special thing. And you see this, how they take care of their patients, and you try to bring that into your world as a male nurse.
Okay.
Yeah, it's special.
So, to wrap this up, I want to thank you, Mr. Paonessa, for being here and answering my uncomfortable questions to have this uncomfortable conversation. I want to thank all of the butterflies that tuned in this evening, my engineer and my producer as well. And I look forward to seeing you all next Thursday to have another uncomfortable conversation. We are actually going to have Miss Sai back. Miss Sai will be back next week. So they will be here to follow up from week 1. Thank you.